One of the most important things we can do to help ourselves work with the cradle is to identify the motions that we want to have in our bow arm. I continually revisit what my teacher showed me about the anatomy of the bow arm and how each part of the bow arm relates to the other. And, perhaps you have different ideas of how the bow arm works, but for me, this made a lot of sense. It allows me to see very clearly where I need to move the instrument so that my bow arm can have these particular positions and motions in it. So I like to start at the top. So the shoulder, she used to call the elevator guy, and the elevator guy because the shoulder and we sort of use the shoulder joint in this way to change the level of the strings of the bow. And that's the shoulder's primary job, right? It's the elevator guy. If we move down the arm, the elbow is the next joint. Now, the elbow, she called the measuring stick guy. The elbow is a hinge joint, which means it can only move in two directions. So compared to the shoulder, which is the most mobile joint in the body, it can move in many, many different ways. The elbow is a very simple joint. And the simplicity of the elbow allows us to feel in a very specific way the distance that is traveled in the bow. And the distance over time in the bow is a component of rhythm in violin playing. So if we can't feel that distance traveled, then we'll have a somewhat of a difficult time staying perfectly in rhythm. So that's why she calls it the measuring stick guy, because it can feel the distance traveled, which is very useful. So the elbow is really the main place that the détaché originates. The basic bowing motion happens primarily in the elbow. You'll see, so the next joint is the wrist, and the wrist she called the drunk guy. And the drunk guy is the drunk guy because he's kind of the one who connects the really sort of sharply moving fingers with the sort of measured movement of the elbow, right? So he makes the connections, the bow changes smooth. That's the drunk guy's job. I mean, the drunk guy also has some more active roles, which would maybe be like string crossings, that kind of a thing. But it's in like a basic détaché, just up, back and forth stroke. You'll find, I think, that the wrist, the drunk guy, is sort of a connector of sorts. The fingers also help connect the bow changes. That's one of the primary things that they do as well. But they also are responsible to a certain extent for producing the articulate sound at the beginning of bow strokes, the little pop. They can help in string crossings as well. But she called them the tick-tock guys because their active motions are very sharp and they're short in compared to the length of the bow, which gives them that sharp sound. And so when we see how each part of the arm relates to the whole, that helps us see how when we move the instrument in particular ways, it's going to change the positions we have in the bow arm. And some of those positions are more advantageous than others. So a very common, say, alternate position that you'll see some people in is this position. And it seems that this position tends to be caused in large part by center-mounted chin rests, because if we have, basically what's happening here is the path the bow is traveling, this point right here is too close to the right side of the body. See, so the arm has to fold in on itself to make itself smaller in order to fit into this space that it's being given. So the simple solution to this, to arrive at a more neutral wrist position and to carry the elbow, is simply to change the path that bow is traveling. So we want to have the path farther away from the right side of the body. And there's a number of ways that we can modify that angle, which we'll talk about a little bit more fully in another video. But this position is a little bit problematic because you've taken the elbow almost entirely out of the equation. The elbow can no longer really act as a hinge joint. Instead, the détaché motion is moved up into the shoulder. And the shoulder is the most mobile joint in the body. It's a very complex joint. It requires a lot of help from muscles in order to be stable. And so it's kind of difficult to feel the distance traveled in the bow in a really physical way with the shoulder. It's almost, it's kind of like the joint is just simply a little bit too large in order to feel that really subtle and minute distances traveled. And then also raising the wrist, researchers have found that, I mean, and this is easy to feel yourself, but if you try and squeeze your hand with a raised wrist like this, you can see that you really can't squeeze very hard. So if you flatten the wrist, you can squeeze quite a bit more firmly. And so anytime we put the arm into, especially repetitively put the arm into positions that weaken the muscles or the joint somehow, we risk introducing pain and injury into our playing. So we found that in general, we want to keep a neutral home base for our wrist and carry the elbow. And that may require us to move the instrument, but thankfully the Kréddle allows us to move the instrument to where we need to have it in order to have the bow path relate to our body in a way that allows our bow arm to access these motions.